Hi, everybody. This is Aaron Murakami, and this is Monday, March 30th, and I have Eric Allard on the line. Okay. So in this call, we're going to talk a little bit about J.J. Thomson. J.J. Thomson was a scientist early in the, I don't know, was it maybe late 1800s, early 1900s?
Yeah,
do you want to kind of
he reached his peak about 1900.
Now, he's the one who's credited with discovering the electron?
That's correct.
And what else about him is significant, and why do people need to know who J.J. Thomson is?
Well, it's kind of a broad situation. It's hard to pin it down to one word or two sentences or whatever, but basically J.J. Thomson adhered to the Faraday concept of electricity, where everybody else started to deviate into the Einsteinian relativities and action at a distance and what have you. So Thomson, unlike Maxwell, did not approach this thing from a purely mathematical standpoint, but he approached it from an experimental and a more empirical standpoint, and developed the Faraday lines of force idea into virtually an ether physics.
Mm-hmm.
And that aspect of his work is not very well known about. Also, J.J. Thomson can be credited with establishing the entire basis for atomic science, and the notions of the relativists and a lot of other people that are making claims to, quantum theory and energy mass equivalencies and limiting speeds of the velocity of light, is all that can be traced to J.J. Thomson. He's the true originator of all of those concepts.
So right now you're currently working on some concepts relating to J.J. Thomson. What exactly, or what parts of his work are you currently studying or exploring?
Well, the book on the last presentation and the last presentation, a lot of that material rested heavily on the notion of electricity as conceived by J.J. Thomson. So now the whole layout and plan of this book on the presentation, the title of the book is The History, Theory, and Practice of Electrical Transmission, and the last presentation, which directed that towards Tesla and Alexanderson, is to step by step from very, very basic levels of understanding establish all the principles of electrical transmission, and what is capacitance, what is inductance, what is resistance, and not by some simple little, half-baked analogy, but to actually be able to feel and touch and smell these things so that you have an intimate knowledge of them. And in order to do this, the Thomson theory of the ether and the Faraday tubes of force is essential, because it gives substance to electricity rather than it being, a mathematical abstract of curved space like Einstein wants to tell us. So what I've done in the book, which basically is the presentation, but, in its full form that I didn't have time or the energy to present in 4 hours, is to get a full understanding of each and every aspect. So now I've gotten to the point in the book where we really need to know what this stuff is between the wires, because now we're at the point in the book we have to calculate how much energy is lost in heating the wires and how much energy is in whatever form pushing them apart and putting them together. So that requires a model of the ether in between the wires. So the one person that accomplished that is J.J. Thomson. He wrote a very large book, Recent Researches into Electricity and Magnetism, where he devotes a few chapters in their entirety to the concept of Faraday tubes and the ether physics that goes along with them. So I've reached the point where I have to go through all that and turn it from complex calculus equations and incomplete descriptions and wordings and lacks of diagrams and all that into a geometrical and algebraic presentation on the subject. So that's what I'm engaged in right now. so that you can actually tangibly have an experiential understanding of electricity, that it's something there. It's not an abstract thing. It's actually there, and it has this whole dynamics. The ether has a whole dynamics. Unfortunately, the ether still has to remain undefined, but the fact that it does have specific characteristics and laws that it adheres to in an electrical form, and with relation to gravity, and with relation to electrical to mechanical forces like in motors and what have you, and solenoids, then it all rests on those chapters. So that's what I'm engaged in now, and I've managed to break through the barrier and convert a lot of it into geometry and algebra. And it's fascinating the knowledge that I'm getting out of the process. So J.J. Thomson is the central figure in this. What's interesting is the way I came about getting involved in his work was first in my original studies as instigated by Philo Farnsworth. Thomson was the guy that really stuck with the Faraday lines of force theory, so I stuck with it. And I wrote a paper a long, long time ago about capacitance. I think it was the first paper I wrote to show Philo, that I was making progress in this and what he thought about it. And Thomson was the center of that. I think, I forget the exact title, but, it's available on the Internet, and Borderland attempts to sell it, even though it's for free now for everybody. But I hadn't really got too excited about Thomson until one morning a friend of mine and I were having our morning philosophical conversation over coffee, and he pulled out a book with a cartoon character of Einstein and some other stuff on it, and it said Occult Ether Physics. And I told my friend Joe, I'm not into any of that UFO stuff, Joe. And he's going, no, he goes, this book's saying exactly what you're saying. And I go, yeah. And he goes, really, it is, and I go, Joe, I don't believe it. So at any rate, he goes, well, read the book. So I open it up and start looking, and it's a book by William Line, and lo and behold, everything that I had stumbled across with the uniqueness of J.J. Thomson work, he puts it in very clear layman form, and it really kind of blew me away and got me to really, gave me a renewed interest in J.J. Thomson, and to start doing experiments, that were like his experiments. That Thomson really stood side by side with Nikola Tesla. And even though the conclusions of what they observed in their experiments may have been different, those were the two guys. And it all ultimately found its way, its origin all came from one particular individual, which was Sir William Crookes. He started the vacuum tube idea and vacuum tube research that Thomson and Tesla took to levels that no one's fully grasped to this day, and also demonstrate that a lot of the concepts of radiation and those type of things as they're understood today are completely false.
Mm-hmm.
So the particular interest in the Occult Ether Physics book is that inertia has mechanical momentum, and that you can store momentum and energy in the ether and recover it at a later point, and you can manipulate this momentum, and you can, synthesize it and neutralize it, and in that way you can have mechanical movements and propulsions that do not involve energy consumption, because you can neutralize inertia, and that is an absolutely fantastic concept.
Right. So with day before yesterday, I was talking to William Line. He's going to be coming to the 2015 Energy Science and Technology Conference, also to do a talk, and his talk is going to be on J.J. Thomson.
Yeah, that'll be perfect. Yeah, because so I'm going to get into the Faraday tube idea, because I have to give some kind of grasp of how the ether can act on matter. and also then how electricity and music can act on matter, because the basic idea in this presentation is we have this assertion that the Egyptians raised the stones through music, and there's been other indications of this, and the Pythagorean understanding of music also led to a lot of interesting power of music type of situations, the walls of Jericho being the one that people are most familiar with. So how does an engineer get a grasp of such a thing and then explain it to the layman? It's going to be an interesting challenge. But J.J. Thomson sits very squarely in this, as well as Pythagoras. So Pythagoras handled it from the symbolic level, but J.J. Thomson handled it from the physics level.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is the name of the book by J.J. Thomson that you're with those chapters? And it's a pretty big book.
The one I'm studying now is the big one. Anybody could dedicate their whole life to it. So I'm not ready to dedicate my whole life to it, because the older mathematics and the lack of units and dimensions and all that type of stuff make it way too difficult to deal with. But the physics part of it, and the experiments, the descriptions of lines of force and all that in the beginning, that's what I'm concentrating on. And Thomson's main work is called Recent Researches in Electricity and Magnetism. And it's about like 800 pages.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy duty and a lot of math in there, but there is a simpler book that pretty much anybody can understand, because it's not math heavy. It's more philosophy and that kind of thing, where he explains a lot of his ideas on these concepts, and that's called Electricity and Matter.
Yeah, Electricity and Matter. It was a series of lectures he gave orientated, to the popular audience and not the scientific audience. And there was a yearly grant that was provided for somebody to do this, and he got that grant one year and gave a series of lectures very similar to what Steinmetz did in his impulses, waves, and discharges. And it's very, very little mathematics in there. It's mostly just elementary algebra and geometry, where he represents his ideas, of the momentum of the ether and the lines of force and their behavior, basic, atomic principles, the discovery of the electron, and these type of things. And it's not difficult to understand it. You do have to concentrate on it. And the problem with Thomson's mathematics is even the simple stuff can be hard to understand, because there was no established system back then, like I've established in my writings, as every letter of the Greek and Roman alphabet has a very specific meaning, and it's not interchangeable. Thomson will use, the variable x for 3 different things in one chapter. So that's why I usually go through these things like I'm doing with the big book and rewrite all of the equations in standard notation and make them dimensionally consistent, and then they are understandable.
Now, what is your understanding of the so-called Tesla's dynamic theory of gravity, which was never really published? He made some references to it. Can you go into some of that?
Well, I like to think that I pretty much have read everything that Tesla wrote. I tried to read everything that Tesla wrote, and I found, a good repository of it in San Francisco Public Library before Dianne Feinstein trashed the contents and removed all this material. I had that lucky interval, just like Jerry Vassilatos did in New York Public Library. And let's see. Now, go back to the original question again, because I've lost to define the terms.
About the dynamic theory of gravity.
Oh, I've never seen any evidence of Tesla describing a dynamical system of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
So it most likely was just something that Tesla alluded to in those teases he would do with the newspaper reporters, during his internal exile here in the United States, where he was feeding pigeons on park benches.
About the airships and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it's not really, I can't identify anything there to describe or work with, because it just didn't really encounter. He didn't talk about that.
So with the science of gravity, so would you say that J.J. Thomson is probably the main one to study to get a grasp on all of this?
Well, now Thomson was electrical and not gravitational, and ultimately gravitational is so, it's like the ether itself. It's just it doesn't lend itself to comprehension. So Thomson does not get into any gravity equations or any of that type of stuff. So and I don't either. But these things do pop up in the course of this. Steinmetz came up with some very interesting relationships that would indicate that electrical forces would behave differently on different planets due to the gravitational constant of the planet. So if you built a motor on Earth, it would not behave the same way on Jupiter, which is a kind of interesting idea. Of course, it's typical of Steinmetz to use, Kankey dimensions and not describe where he got things from, to take mathematical shortcuts. So I have no idea how he came up with this idea, but at any rate, it's in the equations. So his equations on the forces that electricity exerts on matter were the only ones I found useful for engineering purposes. The ones in the physics books are worthless. The dimensions don't add up, and they're all related towards things that have no physical existence in the electrical engineering world. They're all physics abstractions of things that can't physically exist, which is very typical in that science. Point charges and test poles and all this stuff that can't possibly physically exist, but they use these things to define their terms. Well, Steinmetz took a different approach, and fortunately I ran across that. Otherwise, this endeavor of trying to, connect the electricity and matter and the ether together and their forces would have been hopeless, even with, Thomson's book. So gravity, it turns out, it kind of presents itself in these equations, but what I'm determining right now in the process of building this chapter is the two forces in the ether, the dielectric and the magnetic, their actions upon matter rather than upon each other in electrical form is actually a third force in the ether, and can't strictly be defined as an electrical force, but it's the force that acts on matter. And if that's the case, then that particular set of coordinates could also be the set of coordinates that gravity lives in. So the things that cause matter to attract itself to other matter exist within those coordinates of the ether. That's what I'm starting to see why, I'm systematically reducing this stuff to geometric and algebraic form so that it's clearly visible, is there's a third force involved here. And possibly that could lead to some kind of ether explanation for gravity and how it works, because the Einsteinian curved space and the rest of that stuff is useless. It's pure magic. So there has to be something that acts on matter. It can't just be a mathematical equation. There's something pulling or pushing or something. It's got to be there. So that's the view that Thomson takes, and that's the view that Faraday takes, is that quote, Faraday, matter cannot act where it is not. In other words, if the electromagnetism flying down the power line at 90% of the speed of light, from the transmitting station to the substation pushes the wires apart, which it does, there's something in between that pushes them apart. It's not a result of the curvature of space and obtruse mathematical relationships. It's something real because it pushes the wires apart, and during short circuit conditions it can rip them off the insulators, and the forces in the substation transformers can reach magnitudes of 50 tons or more. So there's something squeezing around in those coils that wants to get out that just shreds them all up and throws them everywhere. So there must be something real there. That's the Faraday-Thomson point of view.
So if you're saying the third force or of the ether, what are the first two?
The third set of coordinates is the way I prefer to say it. But yeah, it could be viewed as the third force, because magnetic force acts upon magnetic induction, and dielectric force acts upon dielectric induction to polarize the ether into those inductions. But the forces they exert on matter are not necessarily in the same set of coordinates, particularly with magnetism. So magnetic force circulates around a current-carrying conductor, but the force of magnetism upon the conductor is radial, and it compresses the conductor. So if the force of magnetism induces the ether to produce magnetic induction in a circle around the wire that is not in contact with the wire, well, then there has to be another aspect of the ether in between that part that's magnetized and that part that the current occupies in the wire for the force to be carried across. So this is what I'm kind of getting at. So you have the current is in one set of coordinates, which is along the axis of the conductor. You have the magnetism, which is in another set of coordinates, which are circular, that are extended circumferentially from the conductor. And then you have another set of coordinates, a third set of coordinates that is radial, that is perpendicular to both the circular coordinates of the magnetism and the linear coordinates of the axis of the conductor, yet it is not in those two coordinate systems, it's in its own coordinate system. Now, the fact that dielectricity is radial from the conductor's potential, and the forces also act along that direction, tend to give the feeling that gravity and electrostatic or dielectric forces are somehow related, and that's what everybody has felt all along. So now I'm kind of getting a little better feel of that too. But this is its own avenue of theoretical research, so I'm only going so as far as, so that the reader gets a solid understanding of what's going on in between those wires on the telephone pole before attempting any calculations on it.
There's this concept, you kind of mentioned it, and I know it's an area that William Line is looking at researching more, but can you talk a little bit about what J.J. Thomson is saying about what electromagnetic momentum is? Okay, well, the situation of electromagnetic momentum, if you have a mass and you bring that mass up to speed, in other words, you deliver energy to it, the mass doesn't want to slow down. It has inertia. In other words, if you take the energy away, it wants to keep going. And if you try to slow it down, energy has to be dissipated. Now, in the mind of physics is that momentum and inertia is inside the material object. The Faraday-Thomson point of view is completely opposite of that. You have a situation where the mass is immersed in an electric field consisting of magnetic and dielectric lines of force, and these things can never be made to go away because the universe is filled with them. And the intensity is rather phenomenal, but somehow our senses do not perceive that we have this incredible electrodynamic intensity that we're living in, and that's what keeps everything, lit and moving and alive and all that. So from the Thomson viewpoint, if you have, let's say, a metallic sphere, and it's charged to a certain electrostatic potential, that basically means that there's a potential difference between that sphere and other material objects at a distance around it. So you have lines of force that project from the surface of the sphere and go off into space to find, the companion material that they terminate on somewhere else, whether it be, a copper plate on the ground or, a distant 55-gallon drum in the backyard or whatever, because the universe is filled with all these objects. So the sphere in space is radiating these lines of electric induction. So now when you start to move the sphere through space, you start to carry these lines along, and also you're stretching them when they're attached to other objects close by. So now you have a resistance to motion.
And once this thing gets moving and you've applied energy into this resistance of motion, well, now that all this ether and the lines of force is in motion, it does not want to stop. So the inertia of the physical object in this situation is not inside the object, it's in the space around it. And this is the fundamental J.J. Thomson concept, is that inertia and possibly even mass itself is external to the physical object. Mass itself could just easily be, an accretion in the ether and the lines of force which fill all space around it.
Uh-huh.
So in a practical situation, we can take, for example, my automobile. So my automobile exists in space, and it's metallic. And so what's going on is there's all the dielectric lines of force from the ionosphere going into the Earth, and the ones from the Earth going, out, and the Earth's magnetic field, and there's all these things that the matter of the automobile interacts with. So in a certain sense, it's kind of like that charged sphere. So if I want to accelerate the automobile, I have to supply energy to its momentum and inertia where it's stored. And then if I try to slow the automobile down, I have to burn that energy up with resistors, which are called the brakes, and turn it into heat, or I have to deliver it to some kind of load, like, pushing a telephone pole across the ground or moving something, dragging it, or however. But the energy is stored in the inertia. Now, from the J.J. Thomson point of view, if I knew the exact magnostatic and electrostatic potential of the space that the automobile was in, and I magnetized it and charged it electrically to those potentials so there was no potential difference, then there would be no desire for lines of force to connect between the automobile and other objects, and all the lines of force would disappear, and I would be to accelerate or deaccelerate the automobile with no inertia, which means I could either start it or stop it instantly without any consumption of energy.
Right.
So this is the proposed theory of how the Air Force Bell telephone spaceships operate and are able to move around and power themselves and all these things. Is it falls back on the understanding of electricity as developed by J.J. Thomson. And William Lyon has shown that, much of the alien lore and everything that surrounded all this is basically just a cover-up, that these are all, devices created by mortals, and the fact that that my operation here is very, very close to the place that they do this, and I've been given some statements about the philosophies involved, that Einstein is not welcome in that neighborhood, and that it's actually a very extended part of Bell Telephone Laboratories of advanced knowledge that's never been released to the public, hence, the title of the book, Occult Ether Physics.
Right.
This
when
is
you say
definitely
telephone,
factual. It's something, people go out, sometimes people come visit me and then they want to go out and look at spaceships at night. They're not really on display. You're not supposed to see them or whatever. But, if you get on some mountaintop around here and you're at the right time, you will see stuff flying around out there that that is not hot air balloons, and it's not, landing lights on aircraft. These are
and when you say Bell,
electrodynamic craft maneuvering in space.
Right. And the Bell telephone references that pretty much today that has been absorbed into or transformed into basically what Sandia Labs is today?
Yeah, as far as I understand.
Okay. And one of the times when I was down at your shop, parked out back, and I was sleeping in my car, I woke up about 3 o'clock in the morning. My sunroof was open, and I looked straight up, and a black craft, completely silent, making no noise, was, I don't know how many hundreds of feet up in the air. I don't know, maybe about 1,000, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 feet. It wasn't really that far up, just gliding silently right over the car and right over the whole town. I just happened to look up just right at that moment and saw one.
Yeah, well, these things are known to happen around here, and that's kind of why I picked this place to do what I'm doing.
Yeah, some type of electrogravitic propulsion or something like that, but there was no jet noise. Definitely was not propeller driven. It wasn't jet, so it was, even if it has jets for part of the flight, it can turn it off and sustain its own flight completely silent. I guess that under the whole thing of electrogravitics, I guess is the category.
Well, that could be part of it, and there could be other aspects too. One of the most secret things that exists in the American military, one of the biggest secrets of all, is actually something very simple. It's the shape of a submarine propeller.
Mm-hmm.
So that it doesn't make any noise or cavitation. That's beyond top secret.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever these people have going, from whatever area they're doing that operation, that stuff is well beyond top secret. No one's going to tell you about it. No one's going to find out about it. And ultimately, anybody that says that they know something about it is probably going to be full shit.
Mm-hmm.
So you can approach it, theoretically, like I'm doing, and come up with possible explanations. But what's actually going on is will never be known. So in a certain sense, that's a good filtration process, because when you got someone talking about, alien abductions or, this and that, and UFOs and whatever, or yeah, I saw this or that, or, I did this or that. Well, you don't get to talk about that stuff because, I live around those people, and believe me, they do not talk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, the whole thing has to be approached more symbolically and theoretically, and the real answers will never be forthcoming, but nevertheless, we do know this stuff exists, and therefore, it inspires an alternate way of thinking, which we're presently engaged in.
Right. Well, these concepts with this J.J. Thomson is definitely one of my favorite subjects, and so if you're listening to this and want to look more into this, that the book Electricity and Matter by J.J. Thomson is a must-read. And if you search online for Electricity and Matter by J.J. Thomson, there's a bunch of free PDFs, or you can get it for free at archive.org. You can buy these reprinted copies in Amazon for fairly cheap if you want to order a paperback. But so anyway, Electricity and Matter is free. You can download it all over the place. And I'm definitely looking forward to where your work is going to lead you in this area, and also looking forward to William Lyne's talk at the conference on J.J. Thomson. And so if you want to come meet Eric Dollard and William Lyne in person and have a chat about some of these subjects, come to the 2015 Energy Science and Technology Conference. It's going to be July 10, 11, and 12, middle of July of this year, 2015. It's going to be downtown Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Coeur d'Alene is about maybe 40 minutes east of Spokane, Washington, which Spokane is all the way on the east side of Washington State, and so Coeur d'Alene is just right on the other side of the border, the Idaho border. And we're going to have about 150 people packed in the room. We're going to have about 11 different presentations and a discussion panel. A handful of the speakers are going to be having live demonstrations of some pretty interesting machines, and we have about 100 days left until the conference, so barely over 3 months, and already there's close to only about 60 seats left, and those are going to fill up really quick right at the last moment. And so if you want to go to EnergyScienceConference.com. That's EnergyScienceConference.com. Click on the registration link and at least get your seat reserved right away. And you can click on the schedule link and go down to the 2015 schedule, and you can see what the updated list of speakers is. It's going to be a jam-packed weekend. It's going to be fun. I think it's going to be another historical conference. And Eric's talk is going to be the last one of the evening on to close out Sunday, and Eric's talk is going to be the power of ether as related to music and electricity. and it is actually related to what we're talking about right now with J.J. Thomson, as Eric explained. Is there anything you want to add, Eric, before we wrap it up here?
Oh, I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay. And if you're listening to this, we may have already launched Eric's fundraising campaign. You can go to ericpdollard.com. P stands for Paul, Eric's middle name, so ericpdollard.com. And there's a prominent link there going to the fundraising campaign. If you can click on that, you can go there and donate what you can. This is to help pay off Eric's lab. The building, recently about over $45,000 was paid to David Whittakin to help pay off the original building owner. And so the balance owed is getting smaller and smaller all the time, and it's an opportunity for EPD Labs to be the outright owner of the building. And there's a couple video clips on there. Adam Bull of the Tesla Society in the UK is helping to co-administrate that campaign and to help get the word out through his network. He has some interviews with Eric. One of them is already posted, and that's been listed on the interviews section on Eric's website. If you go there and you click on interviews, there's a page with a whole long list of all kinds of interviews with Eric Dollard, including the latest one by Adam Bull. And there'll be a video on the campaign page where Eric and I are going over the funding that's needed and how much money is allocated to each part of the project. And so definitely please donate whatever you can, no matter how big or small. Every bit counts and is greatly appreciated. And even if you're not able to donate financially, if you can at least help spread the word, put it out on Facebook, on Twitter, through Google+, and let your friends know about it, and just kind of share it around. And anything you can do to help get the word out is appreciated. So I guess with that, we can go ahead and wrap it up, Eric.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time as always. This J.J. Thomson stuff is very fascinating. And again, everybody go out and get a copy of Electricity and Matter, read up on that, and that'll give you a good primer for what a lot of these concepts are about. And again, it is a book for the layman, as it was a series of lectures for the general public, and so it doesn't have a lot of math and stuff, so pretty much anybody can understand it. And I guess with that, thanks a lot, Eric, and we'll be chatting with you soon.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay, talk to you later.
Okay, bye. Thomson, unlike Maxwell, did not approach this thing from a purely mathematical standpoint, but he approached it from an experimental and a more empirical standpoint, and developed the Faraday lines of force idea into virtually an ether physics.
Mm-hmm.
And that aspect of his work is not very well known about. Also, J.J. Thomson can be credited with establishing the entire basis for atomic science. And the notions of the relativists and a lot of other people that are making claims to, quantum theory and energy mass equivalencies and limiting speeds of the velocity of light, is all that can be traced to J.J. Thomson. He's the true originator of all of those concepts.
So right now you're currently working on some concepts relating to J.J. Thomson. What exactly, or what parts of his work are you currently studying or exploring?
Well, the book on the last presentation and the last presentation, a lot of that material rested heavily on the notion of electricity is conceived by J.J. Thomson. So now the whole layout and plan of this book on the presentation, the title of the book is The History, Theory, and Practice of Electrical Transmission, and the last presentation, which directed that towards Tesla and Alexanderson, is to step by step from very, very basic levels of understanding establish all the principles of electrical transmission and what is capacitance, what is inductance, what is resistance, and not by some simple little, half-baked analogy, but to actually be able to feel and touch and smell these things so that you have an intimate knowledge of them. And in order to do this, the Thomson theory of the ether and the in their entirety to the concept of Faraday tubes and the ether physics that goes along with them. So I've reached the point where I have to go through all that and turn it from complex calculus equations and incomplete descriptions and wordings and lacks of diagrams and all that into a geometrical and algebraic presentation on the subject. So that's what I'm engaged in right now, so that you can actually tangibly have an experiential understanding of electricity, that it's something there. It's not an abstract thing. It's actually there, and it has this whole dynamics. The ether has a whole dynamics. Unfortunately, the ether still has to remain undefined, but the fact that it does have specific characteristics and laws that it adheres to in an electrical form and with relation to gravity and with relation to mechanical forces like in motors and what have you and solenoids, then it all rests on those chapters. Faraday tubes of force is essential because it gives substance to electricity rather than it being, a mathematical abstract of curved space like Einstein wants to tell us. So what I've done in the book, which basically is the presentation, but, in its full form that I didn't have time or the energy to present in 4 hours, is to get a full understanding of each and every aspect. So now I've gotten to the point in the book where we really need to know what this stuff is between the wires, because now we're at the point in the book we have to calculate how much energy is lost in heating the wires and how much energy is in whatever form pushing them apart and putting them together. So that requires a model of the ether in between the wires. So the one person that accomplished that is J.J. Thomson. He wrote a very large book, Recent Researches into Electricity and Magnetism, where he devotes a few chapters.
Hi, everybody. This is Aaron Murakami, and this is Monday, March 30th, and I have Eric Dollard on the line. Okay. So in this call, we're going to talk a little bit about J.J. Thomson. J.J. Thomson was a scientist early in the, was it maybe late 1800s, early 1900s?
Yeah,
do you want to kind of
he reached his peak about 1900.
Now, he's the one who's credited with discovering the electron?
That's correct.
And what else about him is significant, and why do people need to know who J.J. Thomson is?
Well, it's kind of a broad situation. It's hard to pin it down to one word or two sentences or whatever, but basically J.J. Thomson adhered to the Faraday concept of electricity, where everybody else started to deviate into the Einsteinian relativities and action at a distance and what have you. So